Now, myth comes from the same zone as dream. And this is the zone of what I would call the wisdom body. When you go to sleep, it's the body that's talking. And what the body is moved by are energies that it does not control. These are the energies that control the body. They come in from the great biological ground, whatever it may be, protoplasm. They're there. They are energies and they are manners of consciousness. But we also have in this body this affair up here of the head, and it has a system of thinking of its own. And there's a whole manner of consciousness that stems from the head set, and it is different in its knowledge from that of the body. When a baby is born, it knows just what to do with its mother's body. It is ready for the environment into which it's put. It doesn't have to be instructed. These things happen. And this is the work of the wisdom body. Also, that same wisdom brought the little thing into form in its mother's body. It was shaped by these energies that live in us, and of which we are the carnal manifestation. This wisdom of the dream, wisdom of the vision, is the wisdom then of the perennial philosophy. When you dream, your waking consciousness aspect does not understand the dream. So you have to go to a psychoanalyst who doesn't understand it either. The interpretation is gradual, and it comes from an exploration by the head of your own wisdom. And so we find that there is a kind of radical distinction between the perennial philosophy in its mode and its axioms. Quite different from the axioms and mode of the rational system.
Well, hello. How's everybody doing? Hope everybody's doing really good. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about something near and dear to me. Or I should be saying, today I'm going to have a monologue about something near and dear to me, and that is nature. So today we're going to talk about according with nature and seeing nature as an asset and partner and essential rather than something fallen and in conflict and on its way to doom. Okay, so first off, I want to start by saying that you are a nature creature. You are 100% a nature creature. And no matter what the world has to say about that, at the end of the day, you are composed of your environment. You eat your environment, you turn your environment into you with digestion, and you breathe the environment. The environment provides pressure, atmosphere, oxygen, gravity, temperature, water, all of these things that you both ingest and embed in is all nature, and that is what you consist of, okay? And one of the monstrous aspects of nature is that you eat nature and you also are nature. And this is a psychological problem, because the very animals that you love to look at and see and, take part in life with, you also eat. And vegetarians can't escape this either, because the gorgeous plants and beautiful vegetation that fill this earth, you're constantly killing these things, usually in the prime of their life, meaning when the plant is at its most nutrient-rich stage. And all of these things are struck down and cooked and eaten, or just eaten raw, whatever the case may be. And so there's a very monstrous aspect of nature, an unexpected aspect of nature that you have to come into accord with. And when I say accord, I mean reconcile, to be consistent with, to be in harmony with. That's what I mean by when I say accord. I picked that term up from Dr. Joseph Campbell, who uses it all the time in his lectures. And so that's a very good way of putting it, because accord isn't in the sense of you're subduing it. You're bringing it into your grasp and holding it. That's not according with something. To be in conflict with something, or to think that something has to be contained and controlled, none of these would be synonyms with accord. Okay, so if I'm going to be in accord with something, there's a whole different way of going about how to approach it. It's a different type of feel, and how you go about, well, for lack of a better word, uniting with that other. And so to accord something that you are also at the same time eating and surviving within, in some sense, is difficult. There's a real psychological concern there, and it's difficult to accord. In my book, I talk about the different types of cultures that humans have developed within. And originally, way back, there were partnership cultures. And partnership cultures were cultures that worked in cohesion with nature and with one another and with others for the betterment of all. And there came about dominator cultures, and these were cultures which served the culture, not the environment or another. It's a self-serving. A dominator culture is a self-serving, service to self type of idea. Domination, usurpation, control, manipulation, corruption, greed, authority. These kind of things drive a dominator culture. And so dominator cultures took over the partnership cultures around the time of the Mycenaeans. And that changed the overall philosophy and landscape of humankind. And we have, since that time, and we're still a dominator culture to this day, we have been in a dominator culture situation. And this philosophy is one where you subdue nature. Dominator culture is a culture where you contain and control nature. Human beings are put into nature in a dominator situation. Human beings don't come out of nature like a flower. Human beings are put into nature. And nature is to be something that is to be subdued, contained, and controlled, thought through, conquered, overcome. These are all types of dominator-oriented philosophies which do not accord nature. They attempt to manipulate and control and contain nature. Okay? So this is one of the major psychological dysfunctions, is the resistance to nature that's put into human beings, because the idea is that they've either evolved out from slime or they're a sinner. And so the relationship to nature is one of conflict. Because if I'm an evolved slime, it's survival of the fittest. He who dies with the most toys wins. These are going to be the central philosophies of a human who is oriented to the idea that they're from slime. Because there's no larger picture at work here. It's just a survival situation. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that puts a person into conflict, and do you want to live in conflict? And it's the same idea with creation. You're in a fallen world. You're a fallen creature. In other words, there is a problem from the moment you're born. There's conflict. You're not working to accord nature. You're something that is in nature, not of it. You see what I'm saying? You've been put into nature. In other words, you're a created being so that you are not like nature around you. You're unique in God's image. These disassociate a person. They put a person into alienation. They put a person into conflict with their environment and themselves. And the attempt in Christianity is to rectify the situation through belief, through believing in the payment for the life of humankind. Do you see that? Do you see how that's a conflictive idea? You're taking conflict and you're salving it. You're making it okay. I'm speaking in the Christian sense. You're making it okay to be alive because in the end, it'll all be all right. In other words, you're not in paradise now, like the Buddhist. You are in a race to win. God said to Adam, you are to subdue nature, contain it, rule and have authority over it. You see, and it's that approach puts conflict, resistance into someone's life at the very core center. And if I'm ever going to accord with nature, it is not going to happen through conflict. It's not going to happen through a situation where, okay, I'm going to believe these certain things and then it's okay. Then you're just pasting your ideas on top of nature, which is blasphemy. You see that? It's blasphemy in the sense of you have infinite potential, and the environment does also. So when you try and conquer and subdue the environment, you're trying to conquer and subdue infinite potential, and also with you yourself by thinking that you're a sinner or thinking that you're from slime. This should clarify there is a real psychological problem there. Because, dude, you can't live a life in peace through a life of conflict. That doesn't work. You live a life of peace through according with life, through according with nature. Not because something made it right, rather because it was born perfect, meaning you went into it and it was perfect and you were perfect. In other words, there's no problem. That's an entirely different mindset when you approach it like that. That nothing needs to be corrected. You just simply come into accord with it. And that applies also to the culture. Because whenever you're born is going to determine what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in the culture. That changes over time. Obviously, human life and the life about you and the life all around us and so forth, that always is of impossible value. That never changes. It's sort of this perennial idea. But the local idea, what is called deshi, the local provincial perspective, that changes over time. And so that's why a baby, it doesn't matter into what environment the baby is born into, the baby will adapt and accord to that environment because the baby has nature within it already. So the baby knows how to nurse mother. It knows exactly how to take care of itself. It knows how to poop. It knows how to pee. It knows how to drink. It knows how to talk. The baby already has all of these potentials already in it. And so it doesn't matter what environment you put the baby into, it will adapt. And so if I'm born in medieval Europe, I'm going to have an entirely different value system than if I'm born in modern day Turkey. Do you see? It's going to be an entirely different lifestyle, an entirely different culture, an entirely different way of speaking, an entirely different value system, an entirely different governmental system, medical system, educational system. Everything is different. And so one adapts, one comes into accord with that, not in the sense of controlling and containing the environment, like I've been born and now I'm going to usurp, contain, overtake, control, subdue the environment. That is conflict, and that will not lead to a life of unity, to a life of seeing oneself in nature. If you see yourself as alienated from nature, you never authentically experience nature, because nature is always, in a sense, fallen. And you in the same way, you never have your own authentic experience because you see yourself as a fallen creature that had to be saved or is saved, as if something was wrong inherently with you. And see, if I have the same perspective as science, switching here now to science, if I have the same perspective as science, I'm not going to accord with nature in the scientific sense, because I'm from slime. So it's a matter of conquering the environment so that I survive as long as possible, to put my progeny into the world and to gather and gain as much material wealth as possible, because that's going to lead me to a quote-unquote congenial life. If you think in this scientific, lack of this any deeper sense, lack of the sensitivity to the emotional state and sensitivity to the things that are behind the things. You see, and that also is what you could think of as a lesser life, because you're not allowing or developing these deeper senses that a human being has in their characteristic. Okay. So to accord with life is the sense of the sailor. I always love to use this example because it's the perfect example. Is the wind moving the sailboat, or is the sailor's mind moving the sailboat? That's the first question. Is the wind moving the boat, or is the mind moving the boat? It's the mind that moves the boat. Why is it the mind that moves the boat? It's because the mind has accorded with nature. The mind and the wind are one. Because in the sense of sailing, the sailor has, through his mind, utilized a geometry that can capture and bring him into accord with nature, him and the boat, or her and the boat. And when they are united in this sense, they work together. The sailor inherits all the power of nature by uniting with nature. You see that? So, in other words, the sailor is able to move, the mind is able to move the boat with no work, because the wind is doing all the work, putting forth all the effort. All the sailor is doing is raising and lowering the sails. And so if the sailor wants to go northbound, wants to go north with a northbound wind, all the sailor has to do is tack, and he or she will utilize an opposing force as an asset. That is Zen, that is perfection. To utilize what would be normally a negative and transmogrify or transform that into a positive, utilizing the natural to do it. In other words, your mind is an asset or an aspect of nature, and by using it to unite with nature, in the sense of the sailor, unite with the wind, to use that as a means of traversing life, so that whatever negative that happens in life, because we have both positive and negative aspects to our life, everything is utilized for the betterment of the whole. Everything is a part of the whole. In other words, there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to forgive, there's nothing to solve, there's nothing to save. That's how this concept just all of a sudden spontaneously explodes. That's how that happens. When you realize, holy smokes, that's an entirely different approach to the world. Because if the sailor doesn't use the wind, they're going to have to put a motor in the back. They're going to have to start burning nature with an engine and propeller. And even if it's batteries, you're going to have a generator of some kind to charge the batteries. In other words, you're using force to drive nature rather than according with the assets, the powers that are already in and readily available in nature, without having to burn it up, without having to use it in the sense of destroying it to come forward. It's a very subtle change in philosophy, but it has massive psychological and experiential consequences. Okay? With that same idea, this is the whole point of life, is to come into accord with it. That's the whole point. And if you try to do that through a system, it doesn't come from you. It comes from the system. And the system harms the harmony because it puts a mechanism into this whole amalgamating, not task, but amalgamating aspect of life. Because if I come into accord with something, I am amalgamating it. I'm uniting with it. And if nature has to be forgiven, I have to be forgiven, everybody has to be forgiven, that's not uniting, that's forgiving. Meaning something is wrong, it's been corrected, and now it's okay. That is an entirely different philosophy than nothing is wrong, everything is fine, I am one with it. The both negative and positive is the whole. There's nothing to fix. White is not going to overcome black. Black is not going to overcome white in the yin-yang sense. Because life isn't in conflict. The two make up the whole. And if life has to be forgiven and saved and so forth, that's not uniting life. If you consider the Christian perspective of the world, eventually the world is destroyed. In other words, white overcomes black, or black overcomes white, however you want to picture that. But in other words, something's wrong and it's righted and it's all or the other. And that totally discombobulates life because it doesn't bring it into unity, it separates it into permanent conflict and eventual destruction. How do you build a life of peace around that idea? How do you build a life that isn't conflict-oriented around that idea? You can't. Because life is a conflict in that sense. And it's a conflict until the day you die, because there's in-groups and out-groups. The saved and unsaved. Heaven and hell. Even eternity is separated. It's either all heaven or it's all hell. That does not bring about peace, alignment, awareness, higher consciousness. A person doesn't realize higher and higher consciousness through more and more conflict, or through taking over or controlling or containing more and more conflict. That's not how it works. In other words, that's not how it works towards unity. I don't eventually become so pure and so saint-like oriented in my behavior that finally life is just so peaceful, because even the saint is in conflict. Because the saint sees life as a conflict-oriented situation, because it's about sin and atonement. That leaves a person in conflict, because there is no resolution until death. Do you see that? That's why a person, a Christian, never gets past sin. Because sin is required in order for there to be an understanding of God. Sin is what brought Jesus to earth because it had to be saved because of sin. Sin is what's going to bring Jesus back in the tribulation, before, mid, after, whichever way you go. Everything is oriented to conflicts because it has to be rectified. There is a problem. People keep sinning. It's still around. You see what I'm saying? This is conflict. And if that is the approach to life, that you never accord with it. You're the person that's on the sailboat. You never figured out how to sail, so you got to keep using the propeller because you never took the time to orient your mind to nature. And so you just start up the engine and blast through it rather than according with it and flowing with it, flowing through it, being with it, alongside it, in cohesion with it. This is not corrected when a person says, but I'm saved. It's all okay now. I'm saved. Everything's been rectified. Jesus corrected it all. There is no conflict, Chuck. There is no problem. Why are you making it this massive problem? It's not a problem anymore. Christ saved and rectified the whole thing. My point is, you're sitting on a chair called conflict. You're saying it's all okay, that's fine, but you're saying it's all okay while you're sitting in a chair of conflict. Because the psychology that philosophy rests on is that something had to be rectified in the first place, which is conflict. And when you orient your life to this idea that I'm just going to believe that it's okay because someone told me Jesus came here and saved everything, you are still in conflict in that mindset, because the way you perceive the world is through a conflict-oriented perspective. It's the reason why you can say, I'm saved. Because there is conflict. That's why you think that you can be saved, are saved, and so forth. It's like a psychology that the Christian never thinks about. They never consider it because that is the way that life is. It is a conflict-oriented thing. The Garden of Eden happened, and we have been in conflict since because we were kicked out of the garden. Humans were kicked out because they sinned. They dared to think for themselves. You see what happened? And so it's been in conflict ever since humankind decided to start thinking for themselves. Have you ever thought about it that way? Because Christianity is taught to somebody. A person learns about sin. They're taught sin. They're taught that making a poor decision and the fallout that comes from that and the harm that comes from that is called something, and that is sin. And so this orients a person. This orients them to that reality. And so the psychology that goes along with that reality is never considered by the Christian, because the Christian cannot imagine a world that isn't fallen, that doesn't contain sin, and that doesn't need to be saved. That is outside the reality that has been instructed. And this is why it is so hard to escape that, because the Christian then doesn't know how to take apart the world unless it is a conflict. Because that gives it motivation. The motivation for life, the motivation for existence and continuing on is through conflict, because eventually there is resolution. This is in other words, life is a trip to resolution. So if you die before God or Christ comes back, if you die before then, resolution then is at your death, not during your life. Because life is something to be subdued, just like God said to Adam. It's filled with thorns and thistles. That, in other words, God was saying to Adam in that moment, that's the way life is. full of thorns and thistles. It's pain. You see? This instructs a person to orient themselves to life through that idea. And if you're a Christian, you're married. In other words, you're married to the religion. There's no divorce. There's no divorce. So you adapt to how the Bible says it is. Well, folks, the Bible is a 2,000-year-old spiritual philosophy. Just think about that. These people thought the earth was geocentric. These are the people that shaped the spirituality. How big is your consciousness? How wide is your consciousness if you're working with a geocentric universe? If you're working with a conflict-oriented universe, how big is your spirituality at that point? If life is something that has to be rectified and controlled, how big is your spirituality at that point? Because it's dualistic. And there's no Christian that's unifying with a sinful world. Come on. A fallen nature. No, a Christian unites with Jesus. They identify, and I talk about this so much in my book, they identify through an idea instructed to them, an idea of conflict. Because what is Jesus? Jesus represents the remuneration, the payment for what? For conflict, for sin, resistance, conflict, harm. As if these things are not one and the same with nature. Nature isn't safe. Nature harms. Nature has no problem. Gravity has no problem. If a child jumps off a cliff, gravity has no problem killing that child. None. Will kill a child as well as an adult just as fast. Doesn't care. If a child drinks poison, nature's going to kill that child, meaning the poison, the biology in that poison is going to kill the biology in that child. Consequence. Nature isn't safe. We live on a floating planet. Asteroids everywhere. Human-eating aliens all over the place. It's a big universe, folks. It's not safe. So this idea that according with nature is this idea like it's always going to be peaceful, it's always going to be wonderful, it's going to be so incredible, it's going to be amazing. It's not that. That's unrealistic. It's not going to be that way. Life is going to kick you in the freaking mouth. Repeatedly. Sometimes for no reason at all. That's nature. There's nothing wrong. There's no problem. That's part of nature. The ruthlessness of nature is already inside of you as much as it is outside of you. You have Bach and Hitler in you. I say it all the time. Because nature's merciless. A person comes into accord with that idea. You come into accord with the ruthlessness and mercilessness of nature. And when life kicks you in the mouth, we all know you get back up and you keep going. Because that's part of life. There's nothing wrong. There's no problem. That's part of life. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it hurts to get kicked in the mouth. Yes, it does. Yes, it hurts to be betrayed. Yes. Yes, it hurts to be starving and hungry. Yes. You get hurt. People leave you. People stop loving you, caring about you. People do harmful things all the time. That's part of it. Get over yourself. That's part of it. It's part of it. I get mistreated all the time. Part of it. There's nothing wrong. Nobody needs to be forgiven. There's no problem. Because I don't have a hang-up with myself. I don't have a hang-up. You don't need to apologize to me. It's no problem. I learn and move on. Consequence shows me things. I respond to consequence. That's it. There's no hang-up. There's no problem. Seeing life in this sense, that there has to be forgiveness. There has to be all of this stuff in order for it to be okay. There has to be all of these special perspectives and all of these spiritual enamorments, you could say, in order for life to be okay, in order for me to be at peace. And it's like, dude, get the freak over yourself. Seriously, man. It's radical because nature is radical. Nature is radical, merciless, but it's also beautiful. And what makes it beautiful is the fact that it isn't safe. The fact that you have to come into accord with something that very well will kick you in the mouth. Have you fallen in love? If you've fallen in love, you've gotten kicked in the mouth. It's part of it. Because when you fall in love with someone, they're eventually going to hurt you. That's part of life. That's part of it. Get over yourself. Allow the love to flow, and a part of that love is going to be harm. Yeah, and you certainly don't want that. Yeah, of course not. And you certainly don't want to harm those that you love. Of course not. But it happens. Because that's a part of it. And we accept that readily. Do the same thing with life. Love the fact that it actually is really hurtful a lot of the time. Be okay with that. Accept that. There's no problem. Because it's just as beautiful in many other ways. In other words, in as much as that it harms you, it's also beautiful. I live up here in the Pacific Northwest, and our winters are pretty rough. It gets really cold. And that's just life. Our summers, our springs, our falls are unbelievably gorgeous. But yeah, the wintertime, it's rough for about 4 months. The sun is low. Days are short. It's really cold, humid, wet, snowy, rainy, cloudy, gray. Yeah, it's all part of it. And there's beauty in that too. There's nothing more silent than a freshly fallen snowy forest. That's pure magic. Well, see, you don't get one without the other, because life is balanced. It's not fair. It's balanced. You see? Okay. See you guys. Bye-bye.